Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alexa. I am the Development and Communications Coordinator here at Georgia Equality, and we are so fortunate to be able to sit down and talk to State Senator Kim Jackson. Thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Hi, Alexa. So grateful to be here. And huge fan of Georgia Equality, so happy to do this.
And we are a fan of you. I promise. We love you. So excited. I just wanted to kind of sit down with you today and talk. I'll start with like a moment that I had. I was watching you address the floor for the first time, the Senate state floor, and I had this kind of epiphany. I had this moment where it's like I'm looking at this Black woman, queer, and a person of faith, and now the first open LGBTQ state senator here in Georgia. And I felt so inspired, right? Like I'm not a child, I'm not 5 or 10. I am this grown woman. I'm looking at this other woman working in advocacy and sitting on the state Senate floor. And I felt so inspired and I got emotional about it. And I felt a new sense of pride. And I said, oh my God, I want to be able to just sit down and discuss what this might mean to you and what it means to our state. And so if you can just start off, like, now that you were elected, sworn in, you've gone through your first session, what does that really mean to you? What does that feel like to you?
Yeah, it's I think it's still becoming a reality for me. I think, and some folks won't necessarily resonate with this, but when I was ordained as an Episcopal priest, like you go from one day being a layperson, the next day they call you reverend. And I was still just Kim. It took months and months to, I think, really sink in that was a part of my identity, truly. And I think that's true for being a senator, that I'm still processing it, and it's still becoming real to me. And at the same time, I immediately sought out some people who could help be a role model for me in this work, so that I could get acclimated more quickly. And so Representative Simone Bell has been that, and I think that she's really helped me in my process of becoming a senator, of truly kind of taking that on.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say about that, specifically as being a person of faith, a faith leader who is engaged in policy, when I was sworn in, I wore a stole from Polly Murray, the Reverend Polly Murray, this Black queer Episcopal priest, who is now gone on the glory, as we would say. She's a saint. And I feel like I wore that stole because I wanted her to be a part of the great cloud of witnesses that supports me in this journey.
Yeah.
And I think that every moment that I stood up to say something, whether it was in the well or on the floor, I felt like Polly was with me, and that her lawyer acumen was helping me do this work, right? Her sense of courage and courageousness about who we could be as a country was inspiring me. And so I really do think that so much of my process of becoming has been about carrying with me the legacy of Polly Murray and having Simone Bell walk alongside me to help me do this work.
That is, yes, that makes, I get that. Did you feel immediately that you wanted a sense of mentorship? Like, why was that important for you to have?
Yeah, so I didn't know that I was going to be the first when I first ran. Like, I thought it's 2020, like, it's Atlanta. Like, this is a Black queer Mecca. Like,
yeah, like, duh. Like, yeah, like what?
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, nobody's done this before. So I didn't think that this was going to be a big deal. But when I figured it out because I was looking for someone who had served in the Senate, who had been out, and I couldn't find anybody. Because I do, like, mentorship matters. I've been mentored professionally as a priest my entire, like, even before I was ordained, right? I think that even my process of becoming an adult, I had adults who mentored me into that and walked alongside me. And so I felt very convicted from day one. I mean, day zero, I always talk about Simone Bell was with me on day zero, because I called her and said, I'm thinking about running. What do you think? And if she had said no, I don't think I would have done it, right? And so So,
Yeah.
I mean, I knew I needed a mentor. I knew I needed somebody who had walked this path in some way before me. And so even though Simone hadn't served in the Senate, she did bring a lot of experience in the Georgia General Assembly, and that has really meant a lot to me.
Mm-hmm. I think that matters, right? I think a lot of us, especially of like certain identities, marginalized identities in these spaces we occupy, there are times where people have not necessarily done it before, so we don't know them personally, right? And we're looking for someone to say, one, you can do it, like it's okay, breathe, right? And then this is maybe a way to go about it. So, and we love Simone. So yes,
Yeah,
you
Simone's great.
couldn't have a better mentor. Yes, I love that.
I think that, I
Mhm.
just want to add one other thing.
Yeah,
I talked to the very first Black woman who was ever ordained as a bishop in the
yeah,
Episcopal Church,
yeah.
Bishop Barbara Harris. And I asked, like, how did you do it? How are you the first? And she's like, here's the thing. When you're doing the right thing, there will always be people who come alongside of you. May not be a whole huge crowd, but there'll always be somebody who will come alongside of you. And even if they've never done it before, they will support you in that process. And that has been really true for my life, and particularly in this journey as a senator. There have been people, Georgia Equality being one of those, who've come alongside of me to help me achieve this.
I think that's really important. I think
Yeah.
it's really important because I know even when I think about things that I've done, sometimes you just get really kind of stuck and you're scared. You know, what if I like as the first person, but just remembering that people will come, do the right thing, and they will come and support you.
Yeah.
That's big. I'm gonna put a pin in that. That's very big. Yeah. I talked a little bit about watching you the first time on the floor. I wanted you to kind of speak a little bit to what that was and what you were saying. I watching you, I felt like I was in the congregation of my church back home as a little girl. I did. You brought your full authentic self, and it read that way to me for sure. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I waited a good little while before I spoke from the well. I was trying to figure out what my voice would be in that space, right? So kind of everybody has their expertise. There's, there are the attorneys who stand up and they talk about attorney things. And I'm not that, right? And there are people who are really great about statistics and just they're great numbers people. And again, that's not me. And so I think I didn't speak in the well probably for a month. And the first month, it was really me trying to figure out inside of my own self, like, well, what voice am I going to bring? And I was actually not planning to speak from the well. It just, it came to me on my drive in to the Capitol that morning that, I know my voice. It's the voice that I've been using my entire time that I've been a pastor. It's the voice that I was given, that I was born with. It's me. It's the stories that I bring, right?
Yeah.
That's my voice.
Yeah.
I don't know why it took me a month to remember that.
Yeah.
But I got there, right?
Yeah.
And then this story came to me just about my own life experience. And I was thinking about, who else to sit, the 55 other people who were in the Senate. And what I've learned from being a Southerner, what I've learned from being a pastor is that people resonate with stories, right?
Yes.
When we tell stories, and this is, I think, so sacred to the African American tradition, right? That you have the griot, like we come from a tradition of telling stories and telling the stories of our people.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I just brought what I knew, which is the process of storytelling and of speaking truth to power, but in a way that is loving, a way that's kind, and a way that's thought provoking. And so I will say it's like every sermon I've ever preached, and it wasn't a sermon, right? But like every sermon I've ever preached, my hands were sweaty. I was nervous. I was anxious because it matters, right? Like whether or not I'm stepping into a pulpit to try to proclaim some message of hope and spiritual renewal, or stepping into the well of the Georgia Senate, those words matter. And I recognize what a privilege it is to stand in that place. And particularly what it means, again, whether I'm in a pulpit or in the well, what it means that a Black queer woman gets to stand in that space. There are not many of us, and it's been for a long, long time, neither of those spaces were available to us. And so I try to take it with great seriousness, and thus the sweaty palms, but also the importance of me bringing my full self to that space. That feels like the only right way to engage.
Mm-hmm. And my personal opinion is I feel like you did that. That's exactly how it read. And so I appreciate it. It resonated really deeply with me. It did. It did. I want to talk about, high point, low point, right? My thorn and my rose of the day, or of your time sitting with the Senate in your first session. Maybe we'll start with the low point, so we'll end with the high point. What was something that you said, maybe we could do this better, or like maybe it would have been nice if it happened this way?
Yeah. I mean, my instinct is to talk about voting and the voting bill, but I think we've talked about that in other contexts a lot.
Yeah.
And I think you're probably asking more of the personal though.
Yeah.
And I will say for me, I watched online live stream the proceedings for, this is interesting. This will be one of my highs and one of my lows.
Okay.
The hearing around whether or not we would allow trans children to play sports in Georgia.
Okay.
I watched that hearing online. I could not bring myself to actually like walk down the hall and go sit in the space because I was so just keyed up about it.
Yeah.
And I think the high moment was watching my colleagues who were Democrats. And like, let's be honest, just because you're a Democrat doesn't mean that you have good politics when it comes to trans people.
Say it again.
Just because they have a D after their name doesn't mean their politics are going to be on point when it comes to trans and queer issues, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I wasn't really sure how my Democratic colleagues were going to respond. And I watched them ask the right questions, demand that the Republicans come up with real like science to address the things that they were trying. I was so proud of just like how my Democratic colleagues spoke up for us. Like I actually wrote, there are 3 of them on the committee, and I wrote all 3 of them a letter that started out with, as the resident, queer person, I will speak on behalf of all queer people. Thank you.
Yes.
For standing up for us and standing with us and making the arguments, right? So that was the high point of seeing my Democratic colleagues really do the right thing.
Yeah.
And the low point for me was that the vote around that bill was a tie, and the chairman sits next to me, and he was the one who broke that tie and voted for that bill to come out of committee. And so this guy, Chuck, who I sit next to every day on the floor, I see pictures of his grandkid. He loves his grandson. Like, it's super cute, super cute. He shares pictures with me of that kid every single Monday. Like, we talk, like we're building a relationship.
Yeah.
And to have Chuck be the one who cast that last vote to do something that fundamentally is harmful to our community, it broke my heart. And I didn't know, I didn't want to talk to him on the floor when we got back together, because I didn't know what to do with it. And I also, I think it was this moment where I felt like the power of, I talk often about the power of relationships, right? That when people get to know queer people, they behave differently. And I do still believe that. But that moment pulled that into question, because Chuck and I do have a relationship, right? And he still voted that way. And so that was definitely my low moment, was watching him and other Republicans make that choice on that decision. And at the same time, the high point was watching Democrats do what we should do, which was stand up on behalf of our trans kids.
Yeah, that's a reality check, isn't right? Like, you've had this understanding within yourself that, relationships change. And I believe that wholly, right? I believe that relationships make or break spaces. They make or break families. They matter. They make a difference in communities. But to have that now brought into question, that's something, that's something.
Yeah, it was a hard moment, and
yeah,
I mean, it made me want to redouble down my efforts to really befriend Chuck and develop the relationship more after I got over my hurt. Initially, I was kind of like, I'm not even gonna talk. He sits on this side of me. I'm like, we're just not gonna talk.
I get it. I understand. I get it. You did just talk about what you were proud to see. in that instance. But overall, what were you really proud to see of like your other fellow senators, right? Like your colleagues, like what were you really proud to see when you were watching their behavior of like the entire Senate body? Like, did something give you hope?
Yeah.
Right? Like, talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think there are a number of places that I can name that, but I'll lift up this one in particular. So I think we all have some assumptions about Republicans and about Democrats, right? We all bring in certain assumptions about how people will feel about us, how they respond to particularly learning about my sexual orientation. And so I was guarded and concerned that colleagues across the aisle would, not be so receptive of my queer identity.
Yeah.
And I was having a conversation with someone. He's a chairman of a committee that I'm on, and we'd really kind of vibe together pretty well on this committee. But issues of sexuality hadn't come up, and I wasn't sure. Like, I don't, you never really know who knows that you're gay or who doesn't know, right? Like, because it's always like a process of coming out and coming out and coming out. Or every day you got to choose, right?
Yeah.
Or the media for me chose for me, right?
Very true.
Yeah, but I wasn't sure. Like, I don't know. Maybe he only watched Fox News, so he didn't know that. But anyway, long story short, I'm talking to him about editing or amending his bill so that it was a bill about hazing, and it was gonna make hazing a felony, and it's gonna make hazing a felony for anybody. So it didn't matter if you were hazing, convicted for hazing at age 15 or 25, it was gonna be a felony no matter what. And I went to him and I just said, like, listen, I don't want your kids getting caught up with a felony for doing something stupid when they're 16 years old. And I'm like, I don't want anybody's kids, getting caught up. So would you amend this to only include adults? And he was very gracious and he agreed. He was like, you're right. And at the end, after we filled out all the paperwork to make the amendment, he says, so do you and your wife have children? And I didn't know you knew I had a wife, right?
Like, oh, okay.
And I was like trying to listen, and I'm like, is he like, what's the tone of this question, right? But the tone of it was genuine. And I said, no, we don't have any children. And he was like, well, I hope you do have kids. And if you do, like, I think it'll be really beautiful. And that, like, I am so proud of that moment. For him, like him being a white male Republican who's straight and cisgender and probably votes really terrible in other ways, right?
Yeah.
That we could have that personal connection and him say unprovoked and just really generously, I know you're gay. I support that I know that you have a wife, right? Not a partner, but like actually a wife. And I hope for a family for you all, right? Those were assumptions that I would have never assumed would have come out of the mouth of somebody with an R behind their name. And so I'm really proud of that moment and proud of what that means for perhaps the future of what we might be able to have in this country as queer folks. If there are enough people on both sides of the aisle who understand that my marriage is real and that believe that queer folks should be able to have kids, there could be real positive change in this country. So I'm really, that's one of my favorite moments.
And to me, when someone suggests or says you should have children, to me, that's a huge sign of like, at a minimum, they respect the heck out of you.
Yeah.
Right. Because to say like, okay, you take care of yourself, whatever, but like, I would trust you as like a whole other human being. Right.
Right. Yeah.
to raise them and to put them out into the world. That is a huge, huge sign of respect. At a minimum.
Yeah.
That gives me hope. That's really nice. Yeah.
He still voted for that other bill, but
absolutely. But we'll take a moment. We'll take a moment. He might be getting there, maybe.
No, I think it is a sign. I think it's a sign to step forward, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. SB 197. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Senate Bill 197.
Yeah,
I know. You sponsored Senate Bill 197. Tell us a little bit about it and why it mattered to you.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's a companion. So SB 197 is the companion to SB 75. SB 75 is actually the one that we got all the way over the finish line and is going to be a law, which is like amazing. Y'all, they like let a Black queer woman make a law in Georgia.
I'm telling you, sit in that. That is
Like, isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Yes. I am
Okay.
like, side note, working to not get emotional over things in this conversation. But yes,
I'm with
that
you.
that is huge. Mhm.
So SB 75 and SB 197 are both about stalking. So SB 75, first it acknowledges that people get stalked and that it's a problem that creates a sense of unsafety or of people not feeling safe in their homes. So SB 75 says that if you are a victim of stalking, then you can go and get a temporary protective order, and then you can bring that temporary protective order to the person that you're leasing your property from, whomever you're renting from, and you can get out of your lease without penalties. So it gives people an opportunity to have a fresh start from a very bad situation, right? And 197 is the companion to that in that it kind of broadens what it means to be stalked. So like right now, our laws around who can be stalked and where they can be stalked are pretty tight and stringent. But 197 would acknowledge, first of all, that people are being stalked within their own homes. They are victims of stalking by their partners or by people who share a house with them. And so it would open up the law to help provide some protections for those folks who would then, therefore, be able to benefit from SB 75, which will be a law, and be allowed to get out of their lease without penalty. So that bill came to me, both of those companion pieces came to me from women who have been advocates, and they're women. Men get stalked too. Non-binary people get stalked as well. Like, I want to acknowledge that stalking isn't just a women's issue, but it was a women's advocacy group that came to me. And they said, Kim, we know that before you were elected, you worked on issues around rape kits and making sure that rape kits get counted and processed and all those things. So we thought you might be amicable to sponsoring this bill too. And of course, they were exactly right. Like, I care deeply about making sure that people who are being victimized have opportunities to get justice. Justice is relative, right?
Yes.
I acknowledge that justice is relative, but I do care deeply about people having opportunities to get justice, but also having opportunities to get free when they can get free. And one of the processes of getting free is to be able to have a fresh start in a new place where your stalker doesn't know where you live, and you can be safe.
Absolutely. What I really appreciated about reading those bills and just kind of the details and what they were meant to do was that it made law personal, right? What I have found, especially coming into advocacy recently, is that there is a disconnect between like policy and then people's like real lived lives, right? And because of that disconnect, there's also like a lack of engagement, right? We don't realize that there is like, we elect these people to sit at these tables and have these discussions and create these laws because they literally can affect something at my doorstep.
Yeah.
And that's why they matter. And I appreciate that because that was a very real thing, right? People are stalked every day.
Yeah.
And something as simple as being able to leave your home and go make a new one so that your stalker doesn't know where you live, that is very real. And so that's why I appreciate it, because it narrowed that gap and that disconnect.
Yeah. And I think it's so important. The women's advocacy groups that came to me, they gave me sample letters that they'd sent to, to tenants associations or whatever. And they were essentially begging landlords, please, like, here are the circumstances, please let this person move. And I'm just like, we shouldn't have a letter where we beg people. We can just make a law, right? Like, we can just
absolutely.
Make a law.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it helped that we already had a law for people who are victims of domestic violence, who they can get out of their leases too. And I want to name that here because I don't know that
Yes.
enough people know this.
Yes,
But
please.
if someone is a documented victim of domestic violence, they can turn that documentation in to their landlord and get out of their lease penalty free. So that law already exists on the books. And I'm just like, we need to expand that to stalking, because having to write a letter where you just beg for your freedom, those days should be over, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It seems like a no-brainer, right? Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's what this law will do, is that it just gives people a chance. And they're already in an awful situation of being stalked, and this tries to give them a leg up to get a little bit safer.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. It's
Yeah.
appreciated. Thank you. Let's see. What do I want to ask you? Something not on my list of questions.
All right, I'm ready.
You ready? Okay. How do you feel like your faith in your position as a priest has really played into you working in policy and politics, period? Like what position does it play for you?
Yeah. So my sense of what I understand to be the gospel, and I use that from a Christian tradition, right? But I understand the gospel to call us to be about making people free. It's about liberation. It's about making sure that we feed those who are hungry, we clothe those who are naked. I'm going to quote some scripture here. Like, the Bible literally says, "Set the captive free." If that is not a message to ending mass incarceration, I don't know what is, right? Like, that is a
Yeah,
gospel imperative as far as I am concerned, that we must
absolutely.
address the issue of mass incarceration. We must address issues of homelessness, of hunger, and of healthcare. That, and so for me, so much of the work that I do in the Senate is undergirded by these principles that I take from the gospel, and they're principles that I think are reflected in almost every other major religion that we have represented. I mean, I represent Clarkston, which is one of the most diverse districts
It is.
and
Yeah.
places in the entire country. There are so many different people of languages and religions represented in just that 1 square mile. So I'm really sensitive to not using like overly Christian language to talk about it. That just happens to be the place that I'm speaking from. But I know that those principles, this kind of
Are the same.
concept of loving one's neighbor, right? Of feeling some type of bond of affection and needing to look out for each other, that is consistent in all of the religions that are represented down the street in Clarkston too.
Yeah.
And so that does really guide me, and that's some of the voice that I bring to the well too. Like, when I tell the stories, I use an old story from the gospel about this is a fun metaphor for me, but there's a story in the Christian scriptures where there are a whole bunch of people who are sick, and they're all sitting around a pool of Bethsaida.
Yeah.
All there, like everybody's got a problem. And the way the story goes is that an angel comes down and they trouble the water, and the first person who gets in the pool, they get healed, right? Like, that's you win, you get better.
Yeah.
And so I told that story from the well, and I talked about, expanding Medicaid is the angel troubling the water, right? Like, if we expand, because right now we have 500,000 people who are sitting around the pool. 500,000 people sitting around the pool, asking, wanting, needing to get access to healthcare. And when we expand Medicaid, that troubles the water and allows 500,000 people to have access to the healing that they need, and that we actually, I think, have a duty to provide, right? So that's the kind of that's how my faith really does speak to policy and guides many of the things that I'm fighting for at the Capitol.
That speaks to me, thinking about my Southern Baptist roots, right? And much of those principles is what informs my duty or sense of responsibility, right? To fight and to advocate for these things that we're talking about. I completely get that, right? I understand that. I respect it a lot. I do. Fun, your podcast. Yes, let's talk about your podcast, God, Goats, and Government. For those of you who don't know, Senator Kim Jackson has a lovely podcast. Where did you come up with this idea? And talk about these goats.
Okay.
I know everybody wants to hear about these goats. Tell us about these goats.
So Rose Scott, who I believe is, the voice of Atlanta, which is amazing that Atlanta, like the voice of Atlanta is a Black woman, like, woo, woo.
I won't say that.
No. Let's be real. She is a Black queer woman. Like the voice of Atlanta is a Black queer woman. Like
any other,
that's amazing.
Yeah, she's representing Atlanta, and it makes a lot of sense.
It's amazing, right?
It's amazing. No, it's amazing. It's amazing.
So Rose is a friend of mine, and she said to me, just kind of in passing, like, Kim, you need a document. And I mean, this makes sense. Like, she's a storyteller. She's like, but you need to document this first year because it is historic.
She was right. She was absolutely right.
So I try to do what I'm gonna call Rosa Elder, just in case she hears this, so she'll cringe. I try to do what the elders tell me to do.
I get it. They're wise. They're wise.
Rose is actually not old enough to be an elder, but she's older than me. So
there you go.
She encouraged me to do it. I thought it was a really good idea, and I wanted to have some time where I intentionally reflected on the complexities of my life. So I am, God, I'm a priest, right? And that's happening at the same time as working in government. And at the same time, I'm also like taking care of 6 goats on my farm out here in Stone Mountain. And so it just kind of made sense that we would integrate all 3 of those things, or at least try to. And I think that's what you hear in the podcast is me wrestling with the integration of all these different parts of my identity in the form of a podcast. But my goats are awesome. There's 6 of them. They're all named after Southern states, which we talk about in the podcast. And, they always provide me with some adventure in life. It's never boring.
Never boring. I love that so much. I was listening. I was like, this is really good. And again, I don't know, and it could just be personal to me because I'm able to see how all of your identities are coming together. And I have just really found as I've watched you speak and just kind of move, you really do show up in all of those, right? You're not canceling one out to exist in another space. And to me, that's freedom, right? To not have to like cancel or suppress or whatever, a part of you to show up in a space. And so I will just say you are really paving the way for other younger queer people of color, little girls. You're doing it. I felt like a little girl watching you as you spoke in the well, and that matters. It does. Keep your intention is being carried out. It is. I'm getting emotional.
No, yes. Thank you, Alexa.
Yeah.
I will say I just talked to my sister before this call. It's I'm just a little country girl from Calpin, South Carolina, and who grew up, in the country. And the only thing I could imagine for myself, I knew that I was called to help people, right? I knew I was called to make this world better. But if you had told me that I'd end up, first of all, in the big city, I mean, I just could not have imagined this for myself. And I'm clear that who I am becoming in the process of developing into is exactly the person that I wish that I had when I was when I was a little kid. I wish I had known that it was possible for a queer person, a Black queer woman, to be in an elected office and in the Georgia Senate. I couldn't imagine that. Like, it just wasn't imaginable. And so I'm grateful to be able to be the embodiment of that. And at the same time, even though they call me a first, I am very, very aware and try to stay deeply in touch with all the people who actually paved this way for me. Well, I'm the first to have the title, but there's so many other, particularly Black queer women who helped make this possible. And I try to hold them in my heart along the way.
That's it. Enough said. Right there. All right. Right there. That is perfect. Kim, I'm just always honored to talk to you. I'm so grateful. Thank you for sharing with us just like a little bit of your personal view on what the last few months have been like for you.
Well, Alexa,
So
thanks for
grateful.
having me, and thanks to Georgia Equality for being friends with me, for believing in me. You know, I called and talked to Jeff Graham before I, you know, signed any papers to run, and we tried to run some numbers to see, like, was this a district that would vote for an out queer
Yeah.
person? And so I mean, Georgia Equality has been with me very early on in this journey, and I consider you all part of my family, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm gonna give a little shout out to Wes. Uh,
Yes. Wes adores you.
well, it's mutual. And his beloved husband Eddie. Anytime y'all want me to do another Georgia Equality wedding, call me. I love him. I do it. So
Oh,
holla at me.
okay. Taken very seriously, Kim.
Yeah,
Taken very seriously.
absolutely. Georgia Quality Weddings, I'm here for them. So, but shout out to Wes and to Eddie for also being just great friends and companions in this journey. Very grateful.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Kim. I